So this is suspension training exercises, part 3, and this is the second half of the core and stretches module. So part 2, well, this presentation is going to predominantly look at the exercise and variations for more the lateral core, involving lateral flexion and rotation. So we're going to look at the reverse wood chop, standing lateral hip drop, side plank variations, and also some hanging drills, which are some of them are quite advanced. We'll also have a quick look at some application with static stretching using the suspension system as well. So the reverse wood chop, this is going to work the shoulders, but mostly we're focusing on working the kind of anterior core muscles. So on the coaching side, you want to focus on hip and torso rotation in order to generate the force rather than just trying to use your arms. A lot of people, when they do this movement, and you'll see when we show you the exercise, is there's a lot of arm flexion or elbow flexion extension. Almost, we refer to it like a Saturday Night Fever type of movement. The idea is that as you kind of hold in the handle, you want to just kind of maintain that little triangle and use the torso and the core and the rotation of the torso in order to generate the force rather than trying to use your arms and cheat. So we want to keep the elbows slightly bent, the arms aren't extended, just keep them slightly bent, but we want to limit actually any flexion or extension of the arms during the movement. To regress it, well, we can move the feet backwards, have a more vertical position, reduce the range of motion, and then if you want to make it harder, shift the feet forward so you're leaning, you're getting a slight increase angle of the start position of the body. You can increase the range of motion, and you can also integrate it with a squat, which is what we'll show you on the video. So here we have the reverse wood chop in action. Take hold of the handle with both hands, and you start in this kind of squat position, and you're going to effectively just focus on pushing the handle up and across the body and over the shoulders. You can keep the feet flat on the ground. I generally tend to kind of coach it so that opposite foot, as you can see the right one in the video, just kind of pivot on the toes. You lift the heel up, and that just kind of gives you a little bit more range of motion. That's kind of what we see when we do like a golf swing and those types of things. The other foot is fixed on the ground, but so if you're going over your left shoulder, you can pivot on the right leg. If you're going over the right shoulder, pivot on the left foot. Then we have our single arm reach. So again, this is a rotation, control-based exercise. Take hold of a single handle, both hands, and you're going to let go, and then you're just going to rotate the torso and reach back with that extended arm to kind of touch the ground. We can add a little squat to it as well if you wish, but for this one, we're just trying to kind of just focus on the rotation aspect. Again, we can make it easier by having the body more vertical. Harder, we'll be moving the feet forwards and getting the body into a more horizontal position. And then we have the standing lateral hip drop. Probably again one of my half dozen favorite exercises. It's an excellent exercise for working the lateral core and the lateral hip muscles. We actually kind of talk about this as kind of working the lateral myofascial line. So you're going to be working the kind of the obliques, lateral core. You're also going to be working a little bit on kind of TFL and mobilizing the ITB, but it kind of integrates all the muscles that are attached along this lateral myofascial line. So internal, the intercostal muscles, and even down into the kind of perineals. They're all linked together, and this exercise is particularly good for both mobilizing and activating these muscles. On the coaching side, we want to focus again on quality rather than quantity or range of movement. So it doesn't matter if you only work a small part, as long as it's good quality. You also want to limit any rotations. The idea with this is it should be almost a purely frontal plane movement. So to regress, make it easier, we move the feet away from the anchor, so you're in a more vertical start position, less of a lean, and just limit the range of motion. And to progress it, again, move the feet towards the anchor and increase the range of motion. You start with the hands, both holding the handle right above the head. We usually have a slight arm bend, and then what you're going to do is kind of allow the hips to drop out to the side and then come back up to a starting position. The way I describe this to people is, if you imagine this is almost like a standing side plank with hip drop type of movement. So you're not just holding that set position. You can do, but we do it with movement. But it's really kind of working the muscles that you would do with a side plank. So here we see this lateral hip drop in action. Both hands on the handle, side on. Start with the hands, handle above the head, and you're going to allow the hips to drop out to the side into a laterally flexed position. And then you're going to effectively perform almost like a lateral crunch to bring you back up into that standing position. Again, a lot of people don't need a huge range of motion with this. If you're particularly tight around the thoracics, you're probably going to find you don't have a great range of motion in this frontal plane anyway. But effectively what we're looking at doing is trying to lift that rib upwards and really laterally flex the torso to switch on this lateral core muscles. Now we have another exercise that's really going to be focused on switching on the lateral core. This is what we call a crossover step and overhead reach. So this is performed dynamically. The idea with this is really kind of switch on the muscle spindles to get this muscle working. So we step over and across, and again we're taking the body into that kind of laterally flexed position. Obviously it's more supported now than it was on the previous one. So you almost end up in what looks like a bit of an ITB kind of overhead lat stretch at the end. And when we do it quickly and we get in that lateral flexion, that is what's going to stretch the muscle, switch on the muscle spindle, and really increase the activation of that lateral core. And then we saw it with two hands. We can also do it with a kind of single arm as well. So again, we have this crossover step and overhead lateral reach. Again, you want to get the end position just right. So you kind of start with the handle just behind the head. And then as you step over and across, the arm is pulled and extended into that kind of overhead lat and combined ITB stretch. Don't want to go too far so it becomes uncomfortable, but again we want to try to maintain it all in the frontal plane so the torso is just being pulled into a laterally flexed position, stretching that lateral core on that side, switching on the muscle spindles, and we're going to get greater lateral core activation then. Continuing on with the lateral core then, so we also have the side plank that we can do. So this is really going to focus on lateral core, lateral hip muscles. On the application, this should be or is a progression from a side plank on the floor because of the altered angle. So again, if you're looking at the image in the background, the feet are pretty much level with the shoulders. So when we do it on the ground, obviously the feet are lower down, so the body is slightly angled, which is an easier progression anyway. When the feet are elevated up, even if it's on something static like a step, that's still a harder progression. So you don't just want to take a complete beginner into this because it will be harder because of that angle. Because the feet are also in an unstable object, these suspension straps, that will also again make the exercise harder. So this should be a progression from a side plank on the ground rather than an easier standard variation you give to everybody. Both feet in the straps, what you want to do with this one is you actually want to adjust the strap so that one strap is slightly higher than the other, and so that top foot should be elevated up just slightly above the lower foot for comfort. Now we can do a few variations with this. You could add a hip drop, so in this position rather than just holding it statically for 30 seconds or so or longer, you can add that additional lateral flexion, so you drop the hip towards the ground and then pull back up to the start position. Or you can progress, if you really want to make it challenging for yourself, some of the single leg variations. So we can do it with just the lower leg in the straps, the other leg just hanging in space. And again, that's going to increase the overload on the lateral core and lateral hip. Or one of the hardest variations is our side plank single leg, but just using the upper leg. So in this case, you're looking at the image. The user will just pop her left foot into the straps. The right leg, the right foot will just be hanging above the floor, but just in space. And what you're going to get with this variation is a significant increase on the adductor of that upper leg. Still going to be working the lateral core, but where you're really going to feel it is the adductor or the inner thigh muscles of that top leg. Here we have supine pull through. So this is a good drill to be working the anterior core. It's a little variation. So you kind of start off in a seated position, so heels in the straps. Again, we can adjust the start position to make it easier or harder, as we do with all the exercises. And what you're going to do here is you're going to have the hands on the ground, lift the hips off the ground, and you're going to pull the hips through. So you're actually kind of performing like almost like a seated crunch, if you like. You can push the feet forwards to get a better range of motion, but the actual movement is you pull the hips back between the feet and above the floor and try to flex and crunch through the spine. Now again, if you're quite tight through the hamstrings or lumbars, you're going to find it's quite a limited range of motion. If you find that you don't have enough space, that you can always put the hands or get like a couple of steps either side and elevate the hands up that way, or even some kind of stable press up handles. That's another way of giving you a little bit more space if you find that your bum is touching the ground when you try to perform this movement. And then we have some hanging exercises. So this is a hanging knee raises. So again, the more space you can give yourself, the better for this one. And we can do this with kind of bent leg, or if you want to progress it, straight leg. We're doing it with kind of feet just tapping the ground each time. You can do it where the feet are elevated off the ground throughout the duration of the set. So we can do it with just pure knee raises up to 90 degrees. We're kind of doing it from kind of 90 degrees upwards, just because there's not enough space on this particular rig. But again, it's a good anterior core exercise as well. It's also going to be working the grip and the shoulder muscles, just hanging in that position for a period of time. Gymnastic rings, as you can kind of see with the video, quite a comfortable one to use for this. And then we have dynamic inversions, and this one is quite a hard drill to perform. You are going to take yourself into an inverted position, so some people from a safety aspect don't like to perform this one, so you need to kind of find out whether it is acceptable in your particular facility. But what we're actually doing is, effectively, it's kind of bar taps. You can get a little jump off the ground as well, so you can use the feet on the floor to help project you upwards. You can do it without, but it is incredibly difficult without if you're just hanging throughout. And this is, again, it's quite a tough metabolic drill. So some people will like it, some people are not that keen from the safety side of things, because you are taking yourself into an inverted position. Again, it's more the application. Is it suitable for your client base, and is it allowed in your facility? That's what you need to ask yourself. And then if you're looking for a tough drill, hanging windscreen wipers, probably one of the toughest ones you can kind of do. So we are holding ourselves above the ground, legs are extended, and then we're just dropping them from side to side. Yes, it is a core exercise, so we're having to control this rotational movement, but your upper body is having to work incredibly hard in order to help control that movement. Mark is looking at making that look nice and easy, but it's a tough drill to perform. You can do it with the knees bent in order to reduce the lever arm and make it slightly more attainable for everyone else. But that is it's a good tough drill if you have sufficient upper body and core strength to perform it. And then again, another hanging drill. This is taken from the gymnastics arena. So this is what we refer to as our kind of front lever. So popular with some of the more kind of CrossFit and gymnastic body weight advocates. So this is going to be working your anterior core. It's also very tough on the lats, shoulders, and arms. So application wise, this isn't an advanced, and I stress advanced, isometric kind of smash pattern exercise. So it's going to be working this anterior core musculature. Can progress from L-sit hangs, so you'd get into the kind of L-sit position, feet off the ground, and just kind of hold that position. So this can be a progression from that. So what you would do is you'd start in an inverted hang position, so kind of torso or body almost kind of vertical, feet above the head, and then you'd kind of lower the heels down to this horizontal position. You have to push the hands downwards towards the hips, so you're almost kind of like trying to do like a pullover type movement, but it's a static pullover. But your arms are working incredibly hard to kind of push downwards and hold this position. Your anterior core has to work very, very hard to kind of keep the body in a near horizontal position. And you kind of hold that for either a few seconds and then lift the body up and repeat, or try to hold it for much longer durations. It's a tough exercise, but if you're looking again for something to challenge the anterior core, then this is a tough advanced drill that you may want to have a go at. So having a look at a few example sessions, here's in the same kind of format that we've done with the previous one, or previous sessions. We can pair a jackknife with rotation with a reverse wood chop. working anterior and obviously lateral core. So we would do kind of 30 seconds of kind of the first exercise, quick rest into the other exercise and repeat. And then we can pair up lateral hip drops with hanging knee raises, so working lateral core with anterior core, and then pairing the plank lateral swings with the lateral step and overhead reach. So you're getting a mixture of lateral anterior core predominantly with these kind of movements. And that's our kind of first session. Should take you again about half an hour or so if you work through that. And then this second session, what we're looking at here is how we can kind of integrate the core movements with some of the other upper body or lower body exercises we've kind of performed already. So rather than just being a solely suspension core session, this is a bit of a mixture. So we are doing close grip rows and then into jackknife with crunch. So that works quite well because the rows are obviously going to be working the lats, but it's also going to be working the posterior core. And then we pair that with a jackknife with crunch. It's going to be working the anterior and lateral core. Next two exercises are the chest press, which is going to be working the anterior core, and then straight into a plank with pike that will hit the anterior core again. So that may be quite challenging. You can see how you get on with that one. And then we have hamstring or leg curls paired with a prone extending plank. So again, working hamstrings, a little bit of posterior core, and then the prone extending plank really going to be hitting the anterior core. So static stretching, you can use this for dynamic stretching as well, but we're focusing on static stretching for this one. So holding many of the end range positions for the exercise we've shown you over these different presentations can also be used for static stretching positions, which we would usually apply within the kind of cool down section of a session. These can be held for shorter or longer duration periods of time, whether you want it for maintenance or developmental purposes. You can even adopt kind of PNF protocols, sometimes with or without the use of a kind of partner. So I'll show you a few examples of how you might want to apply some of those end range positions in order to kind of help stretch you. So we could do this position in order to kind of stretch the shoulder and the lateral core. So the shoulder in particular is going to be more kind of posterior shoulder, and lateral core, so we're pulling the body into kind of like a rotated position. And again, we can do this with the rear knee. So we're doing it in a kind of split squat position. You can do it with the rear knee on the ground or off the ground, whichever you kind of find more comfortable. Some people, if you're holding it for a period of time, will find placing that knee on the ground means they can relax into the position a little bit more. Here we have our chest flies, which we can kind of hold statically in order to help stretch the chest muscles. And again, what's quite nice about this is obviously it makes it nice and easy for you to vary and tweak the hand position, lift them higher or lower to hit different muscle fibers of the pectorals. And we have that lunge and overhead reach, so we can get into this position where the hands are getting pulled above the head in order to help stretch the hip flexor and the anterior core. And again, we can hold a kind of split squat position, or you can drop that rear knee onto the ground. And the trick with this one is just to focus on elevating the rib cage rather than allowing the lumbar curvature to extend excessively. So you should feel it on the front of your torso. If you feel it on the back, then you're probably allowing your lumbar curvature to extend a little bit too much. Now this one isn't one of the end range positions, but you can pop your foot in the strap as if you're doing like a Bulgarian split squat, and then actually just take hold of the strap and kind of lift it up using the arm in order to pull the foot into, or the knee into a flex position to help stretch the quad. So kind of like a standing quad stretch, but rather than holding on to the foot with your hand, you're just popping it in the strap, and then you're using the strap and pulling that upwards in order to get better stretch. And then we can also do a hamstring stretch with this as well. So you pop the heel into the strap, lift it up off the ground, and then keeping the legs straight, we're just kind of reaching forward to kind of touch the toes. Nice thing again with this one is that the instability can actually kind of help a little bit with getting a slightly better stretch than if the foot is just on the ground. We can also do a tricep stretch. So we would kind of get into this overhead tricep extension position, really flex the hips, so it's very minimal amount of stress on the triceps. And again, you're just shifting the body weight forward to pull the handles and therefore the hands into a flexed elbow position in order to stretch these triceps. And then we had that lateral step and overhead reach, which I was just talking about in relation to the lateral myofascial line. So if you want to stretch lats, lateral core, TFL, the tensor fasciae lata, all part of this lateral myofascial line, then this stretch is a really good one for that. And again, we just hold it statically, shift ourselves out as wide as we want, and just get into a kind of comfortable end range position. Now, in relation to application, if we wanted to do like a PNF, then once you're in that position, you'd obviously hold it for the stretch section. To get an isometric contraction, that you'd almost then try to focus on pulling the elbow down, kind of like doing like a one-armed lat pull down. Just an isometric contraction, so you kind of pull against a strap, which isn't going to give at all, just to activate that muscle, and then you can stretch a little bit further into it on the subsequent relaxation phase. And then the last one we have is a lat stretch, so you'd kind of lean into it, flex at the hips, and allow the hands to kind of come up, so you're kind of reaching upwards. You can really sit back with the hips as well, so there's a traction force at the shoulder, kind of pulling on the lats. We can adjust the hand position, don't always have to have it palms facing down. And then to increase the stretch on each side, we would just shift the weight towards the left to get a little bit more stretch on the left lat, and to the right for the right lat, respectively. Can be done one arm at a time. We're kind of showing you this with two hands, obviously. And there are a variety of other positions you could adopt. It really is just kind of playing around with some of the positions and just seeing which ones work for you. So the quick review, the objective of this module was to give an overview of some of the core suspension exercises, provide coaching points and application for each, and give an overview of some example static suspension stretches. It's also provides some guided practice for the exercises and give you a few different core sessions to follow. One core on its own, and then one like an integrated core session. So you should perform the guided learning hours for this section, which is 2 hours of guided practice of the core exercises, which are listed on the management system, and then 2 hours of practice of the core sessions. You want to take yourself through the list of exercises and then the 2 example core sessions. You should log the guided learning hours for your online submission.